Chapter 17 takes a look at the biosocial component of the developmental phase known as emerging adulthood. So what is emerging adulthood? Roughly, it's the period between the ages of 18 and 25. That time period is usually characterized by strong, active bodies, good physical health, and they make mention here that physical work and parenthood are no longer expected of every young adult in the 21st century. Feel free to pause here and take a look at these here. They mention a few things that contribute to growth and strength. And there are three terms here to take a look at here: organ reserve, homeostasis, and allostasis. And please pause the video and take a moment and read these, and make notes if you need to do so. So this just takes a look at during that phase of development, takes a look at insufficient sleep or maybe poor sleep habits. And so you can take a look at this and see that on the illustration on the right-hand side, with insufficient sleep, one can experience an increase in appetite, weight, depression, accidents. And on the other hand, insufficient sleep, that can actually decrease one's energy, alertness, health, and life expectancy. So, factors that contribute to staying healthy. First of all, activity. Things like aerobic exercise, strength training, things of, just a lot of activity encourages health, good, strong health. And factors that are known to encourage activity are things like friendship, strong social interactions, which is what they refer to as in communities. And I did add a note down below here in italics, and I wrote that past generations, they quit exercising when they got married, when they became parents, and they became more devoted to their careers. But things are kind of changing these days, and so young adults today, they're more aware of this, and they're a little more socially interactive and actually pursue physical activity. Now, other factors that are involved with health are definitely good diet, eating well. There's this term here called set point, and that's a certain body weight that our homeostatic processes strives to maintain. This starts taking a look at the developing sexuality in emerging adulthood, and they just mention a couple of things. Sexual reproductive system becomes vigorous. So feel free to pause the video here and take a look at these a little more in depth if you seek a little more insight into this. Okay, so we'll begin to take a look at certain things that might affect one's health in this developmental phase. And one of these is emotional stress. So, so it says, current sexual patterns may contribute to emotional stress as relationships begin and end. And definitely those kinds of things can be affected by attitudes, about the purpose of sexual relations. And yeah, so please pause and take a look at these. Maybe take a moment and consider what you think about these topics here, your attitudes and beliefs. Okay, so we'll start to take a look here at psychopathology. And so definitely multiple stresses of emerging adults, so it says here that, most emerging adults, they experience fewer stresses, their self-esteem is higher, and suicidal thoughts are less common. But these are just generalizations, so this is not true for every single individual. And there's a term here that is called diathesis, and that's a stress model. And that's the view that mental disorders are produced by the interaction of genetics and a stressful environment in life events. So I did add a note here in italics down at the bottom that where I state that although psychopathology is evident during these years, and although biological causes, especially genes, are implicated, placement here does not mean that the causes are all biological, nor that this age period causes illness. Just something to keep in mind there. Okay, so psychological disorders in emerging adulthood, so emerging adults, they experience more of every diagnosed psychological disorder than any older group. Things that may contribute to that is sexual freedom, that can cause anxiety, depression, drug abuse, disease, loss of connection, weaker connection with parents. Parents become less involved with their children at that age, and definitely problems with gaining employment, holding down a job, things like that. Those can all contribute to psychological disorders. And I did make a note down here at the bottom that most of these serious disorders, they start in adolescence and grow worse in emerging adulthood. And so many are comorbid. Comorbid means that there may be more than one disorder occurring simultaneously. They almost work interdependently. They work together. Another disorder that can occur during this age time is depressive disorders. And so it says before they reach 30 years of age, 8% of U.S. residents suffer from major depressive disorder. And so please stop the video here and take a look at some of the examples and some of the things that define major depressive disorder. One thing at the bottom here that is important to know is the social cost of depression is higher than most physical illness. So, definitely things, that depression can really, create issues with is, education, vocational choices, romantic commitment, and employment. So all those can be affected by depression. Another disorder that can occur is anxiety disorder. And so those are usually shaped by age and genetic vulnerability. And that's a little more common, that commonly occurs a little more often than does depression. And some other psychological disorders that are considered in this chapter are schizophrenia. And usually those symptoms usually begin in adolescence, and then they're most commonly diagnosed during emerging adulthood, early adulthood, from between 18 to 24 years old. So some of the risk factors with schizophrenia are that they are genetic, and definitely malnutrition when the brain is developing, and social pressures can all contribute to schizophrenia. And for some reason, that it's been determined that it actually happens. It can be a lot higher and a little more prevalent, amongst immigrants. And so that's something to consider, maybe look into if you're interested in gaining a little more insight into that. Okay, so definitely taking risks, during emerging adulthood, that is a lot more prevalent at that age group than maybe at other times during life. It's not considered pathological, but unfortunately, things like accidents, homicides, suicides, those are a lot more common and prevalent amongst people aged 15 to 25. And this is definitely most common with young adult males. I want to take a look here at drug and substance abuse. Okay, so drug and substance abuse, that is recognized in the DSM-5, as a psychological disorder. So that means, ingesting drugs to the extent that it impairs one's biological or psychological well-being. Another common substance that is abused, in emerging adulthood is alcohol and also marijuana. Okay, so we'll take a look here at social norms and how those usually, how they affect one during that age, that developmental age group. And so social norms, they're customs for usual behavior within a particular society. So right there, just realize that social norms, those are culturally driven. Couple terms here to keep in mind are base rate neglect, and that is a tendency to overlook or even ignore the frequency of a specific factor when making a judgment or a decision, even in the face of overwhelming odds. So that is called base rate neglect. And the second term on this slide here is called availability error. And that occurs when people remember most easily the events or people who make a dramatic impact. So those are things that definitely, those are two ways that social norms influence our thought processes and behavior at that age group, that developmental age group. And so that concludes the topics discussed in this chapter. And thank you very much for tuning in.